Picture this: the summer heat of the Russian steppe in 1943, where the air hangs heavy with the acrid smell of gunpowder and diesel fumes. Tanks rumble across vast fields, artillery thunders in the distance, and soldiers huddle in whatever shelter they can find amid the chaos of one of history's greatest armoured clashes. But what if, in the midst of that mechanized inferno, something else was present? Something not of this world watching from the shadows. Not the enemy scouts or snipers you might expect, but an unseen presence that chilled the blood of hardened Wehrmacht troops more than any Soviet assault. Welcome back to Wartime Stories, where we delve into the unexplained encounters reported by those who served on the front lines. Today, we're examining accounts from German soldiers during the Battle of Kursk, a pivotal engagement that marked the turning point on the Eastern Front. For context, the Battle of Kursk unfolded in July and August of 1943 in the salient around the city of Kursk in western Russia. It was the largest tank battle ever fought, involving over 2 million men, 6,000 tanks, and 4,000 aircraft. The Germans launched Operation Citadel to eliminate the Soviet bulge in their lines, hoping to regain the initiative after Stalingrad. But the Soviets, forewarned by intelligence, had fortified the area with deep defensive belts, minefields, and anti-tank guns. The fighting was brutal, house to house in villages, trench to trench in the fields, with casualties mounting into the hundreds of thousands. These stories come from declassified Wehrmacht reports, personal diaries, and post-war interviews with survivors, fragments pieced together over decades. While skeptics might dismiss them as battle fatigue or hallucinations induced by the stress of combat, the consistency across multiple units is striking. Soldiers from the 4th Panzer Army under General Hermann Hoth repeatedly described an eerie sensation of being observed in captured structures, particularly an old set of barracks on the outskirts of a village called Prokhorovka. This wasn't just paranoia, it was something tangible, something that left men whispering about ghosts from Russia's bloody past. Prokhorovka itself was a focal point of the battle, where on July 12th hundreds of tanks clashed in a maelstrom of fire and steel. But before that cataclysm, advance elements of the Town SS Panzer Corps occupied abandoned Soviet barracks, sturdy, pre-revolutionary buildings that had housed Tsarist troops, then Red Army units. What lurked there? Was it the restless spirits of the dead, drawn by the fresh carnage? Or something older, a malevolent force tied to the land itself? As we explore these testimonies, ask yourself, in the fog of war, where does reality end and the supernatural begin? Chapter 1. Arrival at the Haunted Outpost. My name is Lieutenant Hans Schreiber. I commanded 2nd Company, 114th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, 6th Panzer Division during the opening phase of Operation Citadel. What follows is taken directly from the small leather-bound notebook I kept in my map case. Entries written in pencil by lantern light, sometimes with shaking hands. I never intended for anyone else to read these words. They were meant to keep my mind ordered when everything else was falling apart. But after 75 years, perhaps it is time they were heard. We crossed the start line at Ost 315 on 5th July 1943. The sky was lit by muzzle flashes and the burning wrecks of T-34s that our Tigers had already knocked out. The dust was so thick that men in the half-tracks wore their goggles even at night. By the afternoon of the 7th, our battalion had advanced roughly 28 kilometres, chewing through the 1st and 2nd defensive belts, We lost 2 Panzerfalls to mines and 1 ZKFZ. 251 to a 76mm round that came through the side. The crew burned inside. We could smell them for hours afterward. Late on the 7th, Battalion ordered my company to peel off and secure the eastern approaches to Pokrovka, a collection of perhaps 40 izbas and a collective farm granary about 6 kilometers south-southwest of the Prokhorovka rail junction. The village had been shelled heavily that morning. Several houses still smouldered. No civilians remained. A few dead horses lay in the street, legs stiff, bellies already swelling in the heat. At the southeastern edge of Pokrovka stood the old barracks compound, 4 long single-story brick buildings arranged in a rough square around a beaten earth parade ground. They dated from the last years of the Tsar, judging by the faded double-headed eagle carved above the main entrance. The Soviets had used the site as a training depot until a few days earlier. When we arrived, the front doors hung open. Papers and empty ration tins scattered across the threshold. "Secure the perimeter, then clear building by building," I told Feldwebel Otto Lange. He nodded, already motioning the sections forward with the muzzle of his MP-40. We moved in standard 2x2 formation, point man with bayonet fixed, second man covering high, third low, fourth with the MG-34 ready to set up if needed. The first building, the administrative block, was empty except for overturned desks and propaganda posters showing smiling Kolkhoz workers. Someone had used a bayonet to slash the faces. In the second building we found the sleeping quarters, 4 rows of double-tier bunks, straw mattresses ripped open, blankets gone. A single photograph remained pinned to a beam. 3 young Red Army men, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. One of them had been cut out with a knife. The eyes of the remaining 2 seemed to follow us as we passed. "Feels wrong in here," muttered Gefreiter Karl Neumann as he swept his flashlight under the bunks. "Like the room is holding its breath." "Save the poetry for Berlin," Lange snapped, but I noticed he kept his back to the wall more than usual. We cleared the mess hall next. Tin bowls and spoons still lay on the tables. A kettle on the stove was cold but full of borscht that had congealed into a dark red scum. Someone, probably one of our own men, had already helped himself to the bread bin. A stale rye loaf sat on the counter, 1 bite missing. By 21 we had declared the compound secure. I placed 2 MG-34 teams on the roof of the western building with good fields of fire down the Belgorod Road, posted sentries at each corner, and established the company command post in the old officers' quarters, a small room at the end of the administrative block with a map table still covered in Soviet charts. The men settled in quickly. They were tired beyond talking. Most simply dropped their equipment beside a bunk and lay down fully clothed, helmets still on. A few lit cigarettes. The red glows moved like fireflies in the dark corridors. I allowed 1 bottle of captured Soviet vodka to be passed around, strictly 1 swallow per man. Discipline had to be maintained, but I also knew that after 3 days without proper sleep, a small mercy could buy more loyalty than another barked order. Around 23:40, I stepped outside to check the sentries and relieve myself against the wall of the granary. The night was warm, the stars very bright above the smoke haze. No artillery for once, just the low mutter of engines far to the north where the division was still grinding forward. I smoked half a cigarette, then crushed it under my boot. When I returned to the command post, the lantern was still burning on the map table, but the flame seemed smaller, as though the wick was being starved. Feldwebel Lange sat on a crate, cleaning his pistol. He looked up. "Everything quiet outside, Herr Leutnant." "Too quiet," I answered. "No nightingale, no crickets. Nothing." He gave a short laugh that contained no humour. "Maybe even the insects know something we don't." I sat down to update the situation map. That was when I first felt it clearly. Not heard, not saw, but felt. A pressure at the base of my skull, exactly as if someone standing directly behind me was staring at the back of my neck. I turned quickly. The doorway was empty. The corridor beyond was black. Lang noticed. "Sir?" "Nothing," I said. "Thought I heard a footstep." He listened, head cocked. After 10 seconds, he shrugged. "Old building. Timber shrinks at night." But neither of us believed it. At 02:10, Gefreiter Neumann came in from the roof watch, face pale under the dirt. "Herr Leutnant, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "Something's watching us from the parade ground. Not a man, not an animal. Just watching. I felt it on my neck the whole 2 hours. When I looked, nothing there. But the moment I turned away again, it came back, stronger. I told him to get some rest and sent Lange to take his place on the roof. 10 minutes later, Lange returned, expression hard. "He's not imagining it," he said quietly. "I felt the same thing, like eyes boring into you. And the air, it's heavier in the center of the square, colder. I stood there 30 seconds and my breath fogged. We woke the platoon leaders and held a quick conference in the corridor. No one admitted to sleeping well. Several men reported the same sensation, being observed, weighed, judged. One boy, 18 years old, from Munich, said he had dreamed of a line of soldiers in old Tsarist greatcoats standing silently at the edge of the parade ground, faces hidden under peaked caps. I ordered extra sentries, doubled the watch rotation, and told the men to keep weapons loaded and within reach. But I knew none of that would help against what we were facing. Whatever lived in those barracks had already seen us arrive. It had already counted us. And it was waiting. Chapter 2. The Whispers in the Dark. The second night in the Pokrovka barracks began quietly enough. We had spent the day improving the position, deepening slit trenches along the eastern approach, sighting the 2 remaining 8 cm mortars behind the granary for defilade fire, and stringing tripwires with tin cans as early warning devices. Our panzers, 3 Panzer IVs and 1 short-barreled Stugee 3, were lagered in a shallow dip 200 metres west of the compound, engines off, crews sleeping beside their tracks under tarpaulins. Battalion radio promised resupply by dawn, fuel, 7.92 Minmetarm, and hot food if the supply column could get through the clogged roads. By 2030 the temperature had dropped sharply. A thin mist rose from the trampled wheat fields, curling around the barracks like slow smoke. I ordered the men to keep 1 blanket each, but to sleep with boots on and weapons beside them. No one argued. I took first watch in the command post room with Gefreiter Neumann on the field telephone. The rest of the company was distributed, 1 section in each of the 4 buildings, with sentries posted at the windows and on the low roof of the administrative block. Feldwebel Lang moved between positions, checking that no one had fallen asleep on post. His boots echoed down the long corridors, a steady, reassuring sound. At 22:45 the first whisper came. It was faint. So faint, I thought at first it was static on the headset. Neumann leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Did you hear that, Herr Leutnant?" I pulled one earphone aside, nothing for several seconds. Then it returned, a low murmur, almost conversational, drifting from the direction of the sleeping quarters in Building 3. The words were indistinct, but the cadence was unmistakable. German, spoken slowly, as though someone were reading aloud from a letter. We both froze. Neumann's hand moved to the pistol at his belt. "Stay here," I told him. I took my flashlight and MP40 and walked the length of the corridor. The beam swept left and right, catching dust motes and the glint of metal bed frames. The murmur grew slightly louder as I approached the doorway to Building 3. I paused just outside, listening. "Nach Hause. Die Kinder warten. Sag ihnen, dass ich..." "Home. The children are waiting. Tell them that I..." The voice was male, middle-aged, weary. It stopped abruptly the moment I stepped through the doorway. Inside, 8 men of 1st Platoon lay on the bunks or on the floor. Most appeared asleep. 2 were awake, Gefreiter Braun sitting up smoking, and Schütze Vogel curled on his side, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "Anyone talking?" I asked quietly. Braun shook his head. "No, Herr Leutnant. Been quiet as a grave." Vogel swallowed. "I heard it too, sir. A man talking about his family. Sounded like he was right beside me." I swept the flashlight across the room again. Empty corners, closed windows. No drafts strong enough to carry a voice that clearly. I told them to stay alert and return to the command post. Neumann was waiting, pale. It wasn't imagination, was it? "No," I said. At 0:20, the whispers returned, this time from multiple directions at once. Building 2 reported hearing a woman crying softly. Building 4 heard children laughing, then sudden silence. In my own room, the voice came back, closer now, almost at my shoulder. "Warum seid ihr hier? Das ist nicht euer Krieg." "Why are you here? This is not your war." The words were in perfect Hochdeutsch, but the accent was wrong. Older, more formal, like someone who had learned the language from books rather than streets. I spun around. Nothing. The lantern flame dipped as though someone had breathed across it. Lange burst in moments later, breathing hard. "It's everywhere, sir. The men are starting to panic. One of the boys in 3rd Platoon swears he heard his dead brother's voice asking why he didn't come home after France." We gathered the platoon leaders in the corridor. Faces were tight, eyes darting toward shadows. No one wanted to be the first to admit fear, but it was there, heavy as wet wool. Could it be a Soviet loudspeaker trick? Lieutenant Meyer suggested. "Psychological warfare?" "Too quiet," Lang answered, "and too personal. They'd need microphones inside the walls." We checked anyway. No wires, no hidden speakers, just brick, dust, and the smell of old straw. At 02:30, the whispers changed. They stopped being distant conversations and became direct addresses. In Building 1, a voice called Private Lehmann, by name. His full name, including his mother's maiden name. Lehmann, who had never spoken of his family to anyone in the company, sat bolt upright, sweating. "It knew where I grew up," he whispered. "It said, 'Mutti is waiting at the kitchen window.'" In Building 4, the voice addressed Feldwebel Lange directly. "Otto, du hast den Brief nie abgeschickt. Otto, you never sent the letter." Lange went very still. Later he told me, only me, that in 1940 he had written a farewell letter to his fiancée before crossing into Belgium. He had torn it up at the last minute and never posted it. No one else in the company knew that story. By 04 Dome, no one was sleeping. Men sat in small groups, weapons across their knees, talking in low voices or simply staring into the dark. The whispers had become a constant background, rising and falling like surf. Sometimes they spoke of home, sometimes they recited names of the dead from the last war. Russian names, German names, mixed together. I walked the parade ground alone, just before false dawn. The mist was thicker now, knee-high. I stood in the exact centre of the square and spoke aloud for the first time. Whoever you are, whatever you are, we are soldiers under orders. We did not choose this place. If you have a grievance, speak plainly. For perhaps 10 seconds there was absolute silence. Even the distant artillery seemed to pause. Then, from every building at once, a single word rolled out, soft but perfectly clear. Wharton. Wait. The word hung in the air like frost. When the first grey light appeared in the east, the whispers faded. But the feeling of being watched remained, stronger than ever. We knew then that whatever shared those barracks with us had no intention of leaving. It had only just begun to speak. Chapter 3. The Eyes in the Shadows. By the morning of 9th July, the whispers had stopped as suddenly as they began, leaving behind a silence that felt worse, unnatural, expectant. The barracks compound was still ours, but the men moved through it differently now. Shoulders hunched, eyes never quite leaving the corners of rooms. Conversations were short, voices kept low, as though speaking too loudly might wake something again. Battalion had radioed new orders overnight. Hold Pokrovka until at least midday, while the division's reconnaissance pushed toward the 3rd Defensive Belt. Resupply arrived at 07:20, 2 Opel Blitz trucks escorted by a pair of armoured cars. They brought 7.92mm belted ammunition, 80mm mortar rounds, 20 jerry cans of petrol, and, miraculously, field kitchen soup still warm in insulated containers. The men ate standing up, spoons scraping metal mess tins, but even the hot pea soup couldn't erase the hollow look in their eyes. I walked the perimeter with Feldwebel Lang, while the platoons rearmed. He spoke quietly, the way men do when they don't want to be overheard. "They're not sleeping, Herr Leutnant. Not really. Every time someone closes his eyes, he jerks awake again like he's been slapped. And they all say the same thing. Someone was standing over the bunk, watching them." I had felt it myself during the few minutes I tried to rest after dawn stand to. Lying on the map table with my greatcoat for a pillow, I had opened my eyes to find the room perfectly still, yet convinced that a figure had just stepped back into the shadows the instant my lids lifted. "We can't pull out," I told Lang. "Not until battalion says so." "I know," he answered, "but if we stay another night—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mid-morning brought the first confirmed sighting. Gefreiter Wilhelm Klein was on rooftop watch atop the administrative block. He had the best field of view, north toward Prokhorovka Ridge, east across open fields to the railway embankment, west to our lagered vehicles. At 10:45 he came scrambling down the ladder, face the colour of wet ash. "Herr Leutnant, there are eyes up there, in the corner where the roof meets the chimney stack. Red, not reflecting light, glowing, like coals." I climbed the ladder myself, MP40 slung across my back. The roof was flat tar paper over boards, patched in places with corrugated iron. I moved carefully to the northwest corner. Nothing. Just the low brick chimney, a rusted antenna mast, and the pale summer sky. "Klein," I called down, "come up here and show me exactly." He climbed reluctantly, pointing with a trembling finger. "Right there, sir, about chest height." They were looking straight at me, didn't blink, just watched. I stared at the spot for a long minute. Dust, bird droppings. A scrap of old newspaper caught on a nail. No eyes, no scorch marks, nothing. "Perhaps heat haze," I suggested, "or reflection off metal." Klein shook his head violently. "No, sir, they moved, followed me when I shifted position, and they weren't animal eyes, they were knowing." Word spread quickly. By noon, 3 other men, 2 from 2nd Platoon and 1 from Mortar Section, reported similar sightings. Always in peripheral vision, always pairs of red points, never quite in direct line of sight. When anyone turned to face them directly, the glow vanished. That afternoon, the heat became oppressive. Thermometer in the command post read 34 degrees C-Sec in the shade. Men stripped to shirt sleeves, but no one removed their helmets. The sense of exposure was too great. I ordered extra water rationed out and told the sentries to work in 30-minute shifts to avoid heat exhaustion. At 16:20, the second sighting came from inside the buildings. Schütze Vogel was alone in the latrine block, a small outbuilding behind the mess hall, when he felt the pressure again. He turned from the urinal trough just in time to see 2 red points hovering at eye level in the open doorway. No body, no face, just the eyes, suspended in the dim interior light, watching him with calm, unhurried interest. He screamed. The sound carried across the entire compound. By the time Lang and I reached him, Vogel was backed into the corner, trousers still undone, car 98K levelled at empty air. Tears cut tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "They followed me," he kept repeating, "every step back from the trench line. Every time I looked away, they were closer." We searched the latrine. Nothing. No footprints in the dust. No smell of tobacco or sweat or gun oil. Nothing human. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the western ridge and long shadows stretched across the parade ground, the sightings became collective. At 19:10, the entire company, nearly 90 men, saw them at once. It happened during evening stand-to. Men were at their firing positions. Windows, rooftops, slit trenches. Someone, later no one could agree who, called out, "Contact left." Everyone turned. Along the eastern edge of the parade ground, where the wire fence met the wheat field, a line of red points appeared. Not one pair. Dozens. Perhaps 50 or 60 pairs, spaced at irregular intervals, floating at roughly head height. They did not move forward. They simply hung there, motionless, staring into the compound. For perhaps 8 seconds, the entire position froze. Rifles came up, bolts clicked. MG-34 gunners swung their barrels. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the red eyes winked out, one after another, like candles being snuffed. Silence. Someone began to sob quietly. Another man started praying in Bavarian dialect. I walked to the center of the parade ground, stopped, and raised my voice so every man could hear. "Listen to me. Whatever is here, it is not shooting at us. It is not throwing grenades. It wants us to see it. It wants us to know it is watching. But we are soldiers of the German army. We have orders. We will hold this position until relieved. If it wants to watch, let it watch. We will not run." The men nodded, but the fear was palpable. That night we doubled sentries again. Lanterns were lit in every corridor. No one slept alone. And in the small hours, when the mist returned and the temperature dropped, the red eyes came inside. They drifted slowly down the main corridor of Building 3, 2 at a time, moving at walking pace, pausing at each doorway as though inspecting the sleeping men. One pair stopped outside my command post door. I watched them through the crack for nearly a minute. They did not blink. They did not waver. They simply regarded me with a patience that felt older than any war I had ever known. Then they moved on. When dawn came, the eyes were gone again. But we all knew they had not left. They were waiting for darkness. And we still had at least one more night to survive in those barracks. Chapter 4. The Unseen Pursuers. The fourth day. 10 July 1943 dawned with a low, iron-coloured sky. No rain fell, but the air felt saturated, pressing against skin and uniform alike. The distant thunder of the main battle had grown closer. Prokhorovka was no longer a name on a map, but a rolling drumbeat of explosions that never quite stopped. Our little outpost at Pokrovka remained quiet by comparison, yet the silence inside the barracks compound had become its own kind of noise. The red eyes did not return with daylight. Instead, something subtler took their place. Pursuit. It began with small things, things a man could almost convince himself were coincidence. Gefreiter Braun went to the water point, a hand pump behind the mess hall, to fill canteens for his section. He set the first jerry can under the spout, worked the handle twice, then paused. He later swore he felt someone step up directly behind him, close enough that he should have felt breath on his neck. When he spun around, rifle raised, the yard was empty. But the pump handle continued to move, slowly, 3 deliberate strokes, filling the can he had left hanging. Water overflowed onto the cracked concrete. Braun backed away so fast he tripped over a loose brick. At roughly the same time, in Building 2, Schütze Lehmann was reorganizing ammunition crates. He lifted a box of stick grenades, turned to place it on the shelf, and felt the weight suddenly lighten, as though unseen hands had taken the other end to help him carry it. The box floated level for 2 full seconds before dropping with a crash. Lehmann dropped to one knee, fumbling for his bayonet, certain an intruder had slipped inside. No one was there. The crate lay on its side, lid open. Grenades scattered in a perfect semicircle, as if someone had been counting them. These incidents multiplied through the morning. Private Vogel, still shaken from the latrine encounter, was detailed to check the tripwires along the eastern fence. As he crouched to reset a can that had come loose in the night, he felt fingers, cold, firm, close around his wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but enough to hold him still. He froze. The grip lingered perhaps 4 seconds, then released. When he looked down, his wrist bore the faint outline of 5 fingerprints in pale, bloodless skin. They faded within minutes, but he showed the marks to 3 other men before they vanished. By midday, the company was a collection of men who no longer trusted empty space. Feldwebel, Lange and I walked the parade ground together just after the noon meal. Cold tinned meat and biscuits, eaten standing. Lange's voice was low, controlled, but the strain showed in the tight set of his jaw. "It isn't attacking us, Herr Leutnant. It's following us, matching our movements, like it's learning how we move, how we think." I had felt it too. Every time I turned my head quickly, there was the briefest impression of motion just at the edge of sight. Something stepping back around a corner, ducking below a windowsill, retreating into shadow the instant before I could focus on it. It was never aggressive, never violent, just present, relentless. At 14:30, the pursuit became visible to more than one man at a time. Lieutenant Meyer's platoon was conducting a short patrol sweep outside the wire, 50 meters into the wheat, to check for signs of infiltration. They moved in open order, rifles at high port. Halfway across the field, Meyer halted the line. Every man felt it simultaneously, the sensation of being paced step for step by something walking parallel to them in the tall stalks. Meyer raised his hand. The patrol froze. From their position, they could see nothing in the wheat except swaying heads and the occasional glint of sun on a bayonet. Yet each man reported the same thing, a disturbance moving alongside them, parting the stalks in perfect time with their own footsteps. No footprints appeared in the soft earth, no sound, just the wheat bending in a long, narrow path that mirrored their formation exactly. Meyer ordered them back inside the wire at double time. As they withdrew, the parallel path in the wheat withdrew with them, keeping perfect distance until it reached the fence line and simply stopped, as though whatever made it had paused to watch them retreat. That evening, we held another officers' conference in the command post. Lanterns burned at full wick. No one wanted shadows tonight. The mood was grim but disciplined. No one suggested abandonment of post. We were Wehrmacht. Orders were orders. Yet the question hung unspoken. How long could men function when every movement felt shadowed? I made the only decision left. From now until we are relieved, no man moves alone. Buddy system at all times, even to the latrine. Sentries work in pairs. If you feel the touch, the grip, the weight, do not fight it. Report it. Note the time, the place, the sensation. We will keep records. If this is psychological warfare, we will treat it as such. If it is something else, I paused. We will face it as soldiers. Lange nodded slowly. The others followed. As night fell, the pursuit intensified. In Building 3, a soldier rose to use the latrine and felt the cold hand take his elbow, guiding him gently but firmly down the corridor. He did not resist, he simply walked where it led. It steered him past the correct door, past two more, then released him in front of a storage closet he had never entered. Inside, he found an old Tsarist greatcoat, moth-eaten, hanging on a peg. On the collar was stitched a faded regimental number, 47th Infantry, 1916. When he returned and told the others, 3 men admitted they too had been guided that night, to different parts of the barracks, to different relics. A rusted Mosin-Nagant bayonet, a child's wooden toy horse, a folded letter in Cyrillic addressed to a soldier named Ivan Petrovich. None of us slept. We sat in pairs, weapons ready, listening to the building breathe around us. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, moved up and down the corridors all night, never approaching too close, never retreating far, always to just beyond the next doorway, matching us, waiting for us to make the next move. And we still had no orders to leave. Chapter 5. Revelations from the Past. By the morning of 11th July, the barracks compound felt less like a military position and more like a sealed chamber in which we were all slowly being examined. The pursuit had not ceased. If anything, it had grown more deliberate, more intimate. Whatever shared the buildings with us no longer contented itself with watching from corners or pacing us in the wheat. It had begun to leave traces, small, deliberate offerings that forced us to confront the history of the place. The first discovery came at 06:15 during morning stand to. Gefreiter Braun, assigned to check the storage rooms in Building 4, found the door to the old coal cellar standing ajar. He was certain it had been bolted shut the previous evening. He had checked it himself. Lantern in hand, he descended the narrow wooden steps. At the bottom, in the centre of the dirt floor, lay a small wooden box no larger than a field ration crate. It was not there the day before. Braun called for Feldwebel Lang. Together they carried the box up to the parade ground where the light was better. The wood was dark, almost black, with Cyrillic lettering burned into the lid. 917 Piechotny Polk, Kazarmy Pokrovka. 917 47th Infantry Regiment, Pokrovka Barracks. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents. Muster rolls, pay ledgers, several letters in faded ink, and a single photograph mounted on stiff card. The photograph showed 23 men in czarist greatcoats and peaked caps, standing in 3 rows in front of the very administrative block we were using as command post. Their faces were serious, almost solemn. On the reverse, in careful copperplate script, Мятеж 3 марта 1917, расстрел 12 марта, покойтесь с миром. Mutiny, 3 March 1917, execution 12th March, rest in peace. We passed the photograph around in silence. No one spoke for a long minute. Lieutenant Meyer broke the quiet. They mutinied against the Tsar. Probably refused to fire on civilians in Petrograd or something similar. The loyalists shot them here in the yard. Lange turned the photo over again. Look at the dates. March 1917. Right at the start of the February Revolution. These men might have been the first to turn. We searched the rest of the cellar. Beneath loose floorboards we found more. A rusted officer's sabre with the monogram of Nicholas II still visible on the hilt, a handful of spent 7.62 Kasapin 4R cartridges dated 1916, and a small tin box containing a folded piece of paper. The paper was a death list. Names, ranks, execution dates. 12 names were underlined in red pencil. Beside each was the notation, Rasstrellan vo dvore, shot in the yard. Word spread through the company within the hour. Men who had been too frightened to speak of the whispers and the eyes now clustered in small groups, looking at the photograph as though it might explain everything. At 10:40 the second revelation came. Schütze Vogel, who had been guided to the storage closet 2 nights earlier, returned to the same room on his own initiative. He said later that he felt compelled, as though an invisible thread pulled him there. Behind the hanging greatcoat he found a narrow gap in the brickwork. Inside the gap, wrapped in waxed canvas, was a soldier's paybook belonging to Unteroffizier Ivan Petrovich Kuznetsov, 47th Infantry. The final entry, dated 3rd of March 1917, read simply, «Отказался стрелять в народ. Да здравствует свобода. Refused to shoot the people. Long life freedom». Vogel brought the paybook to me. We opened it together. Tucked between the pages was a small hand-drawn map of the barracks compound. Red X's marked 12 spots in the parade ground, precisely where the 12 men had presumably been executed. One X was larger than the others, circled twice. It sat almost exactly in the centre of the square, where I'd stood 2 nights earlier and demanded that whatever was here speak plainly. That afternoon the sky darkened further. No rain, but the air grew thick with the promise of storm. I ordered the men to gather in the mess hall. 93 soldiers crowded the long tables, helmets off, weapons stacked against the walls. I placed the photograph and the paybook on the table in front of them. "This is what we're dealing with," I said. "Not partisans, not Soviet trickery. These barracks were the site of a mutiny and a firing squad in 1917. 12 men were shot in the yard for refusing orders. Their bodies were probably buried right here, quicklime, unmarked graves. The Red Army took over the buildings later, but they never disturbed the ground. We have." I paused. Every face was turned toward me. "Whatever is here, call it ghosts, call it memory, call it something older, it has been waiting nearly 30 years for someone to acknowledge what happened. We arrived, we occupied the place, we woke it. Now it wants us to see, to know, to remember." A low murmur ran through the room. No one contradicted me. No one laughed. Gefreiter Klein spoke first, voice unsteady. "What does it want from us, Herr Leutnant? An apology? A salute? We weren't even born then." "I don't know," I admitted. "But it isn't trying to kill us. It's trying to be seen. So we will see it. Tonight, we light every lantern we have. We leave the doors open. We do not hide. If it wants to show itself, we let it." Lang added quietly, "And if it speaks again, we listen." The men nodded, slowly, reluctantly, but they nodded. As dusk settled, we prepared. Lanterns were hung in every window. Doors were wedged open. Sentries stood in pairs at the thresholds instead of inside. The parade ground was left empty and illuminated by 2 truck headlights rigged to batteries. At 22:30, the temperature dropped sharply. At 23:10, the first figure appeared. Not red eyes this time. A man, tall, thin, in a long Tsarist greatcoat, stepped from the shadow of the administrative block. He had no face, only darkness beneath the peaked cap. He stood motionless in the centre of the X we had identified as the main execution point. One by one, others joined him. 12 figures in total. They formed a rough line across the parade ground facing the barracks. They did not move. They simply stood, watching, waiting. And for the first time since we arrived, the barracks felt still, as though something long unfinished had finally been allowed to begin. Chapter 6. The Night of Confrontation. The 12th of July, 1943, arrived under a sky the colour of bruised steel. The main battle had reached its crescendo 20 kilometres to the north. Prokhorovka. Radio traffic was a continuous howl of static. Broken voices shouting grid references, casualty figures, requests for Stuka, support that never came. Our little holding at Pokrovka felt suddenly insignificant. Yet we could not leave. Battalion's last clear order at 04 had been blunt. Maintain the blocking position until further notice. Relief was promised within 24 hours. No one believed it. Inside the barracks, the atmosphere had shifted again. The 12 figures that had stood motionless on the parade ground the previous night had vanished with first light, but their presence lingered like smoke in closed rooms. The men no longer jumped at every shadow. Instead, they moved with the careful deliberation of people sharing space with something dangerous but not yet hostile. Rifles stayed loaded, bayonets remained fixed. But eyes kept drifting toward the centre of the yard where the largest red X had been marked on the old map. I called the company together at 08:30 in the mess hall. Lanterns still burned despite the daylight, filtering through cracked windows. No one wanted to sit in full shadow. 93 faces watched me. Some were pale with exhaustion. Others had the hard, resigned look of men who had accepted that ordinary explanations no longer applied. "We have seen what is here," I began. 12 men executed in this yard in 1917 for refusing to fire on their own people. Their deaths were never acknowledged. Their graves, if they exist, are still under our boots. Whatever remains of them has made itself known to us. It has not attacked. It has not tried to drive us out. It has demanded that we see. Tonight we will give it more than that. We will confront it. A low murmur ran through the room. Not dissent. Curiosity mixed with dread. Feldwebel Lang stepped forward. How, Herr Leutnant? We go to the centre of the parade ground at midnight. Unarmed. No lanterns, no helmets. Just ourselves. We stand where they stood. We speak to them. If they want recognition, we give it. If they want something else, I let the sentence hang. We find out. There was silence for perhaps 10 seconds. Then Gefreiter Klein spoke, voice steady for the first time in days. I'll go. One by one, others nodded. Not all. Some men looked away, shame in their eyes. But 34 volunteers stepped forward. Enough for a platoon. Enough to represent the company. The rest of the day passed in taut routine, sentry rotations, weapon maintenance, radio watches. No one mentioned the coming night aloud, but it coloured every action. Men cleaned their boots. They wrote final letters home and tucked them inside tunic pockets. They shared cigarettes without the usual ribbing. At 23:45 we assembled in the administrative block corridor. I had chosen the 34 volunteers carefully, a mix of old hands and young replacements, Catholics, Protestants, men from every corner of the Reich. Lange stood at my right, Neumann at my left. No one spoke. At 23:58 we stepped out onto the parade ground. The night was moonless, warm, windless. The only sounds were distant artillery and our boots on packed earth. We formed a loose semicircle facing the centre X, the spot where the photograph suggested the main execution had taken place. I carried nothing but the 1917 paybook of Ivan Petrovich Kuznetsov. The others carried nothing at all. At midnight I raised my voice, not shouting, just clear enough to carry across the open ground. We are soldiers of the German army. We did not choose this war. We did not choose this ground. But we are here. We have seen your names. We have read your refusal. We know what was done to you here on 12 March 1917. We acknowledge it. We remember it. If there is anything more you require, speak. We are listening. For a long minute, nothing happened. Only the slow tick of cooling metal from the lagered vehicles and the far-off rumble of the front. Then the temperature dropped. It was not gradual, it was instant, like stepping from summer into a meat locker. Our breath fogged, the sweat on our necks turned cold, and from every direction at once came the sound of boots. Not loud, not marching, in step. Just the soft crunch of hobnails on dirt, approaching from the edges of the compound. They appeared one by one. First, the tall figure in the Tsarist greatcoat, the one without a visible face. Then the others, 12 in total. They walked, not glided, not floated, out of the darkness beyond the fence line, through gaps that were not gates, until they stood facing us at a distance of 10 meters. Their coats were tattered but recognizable. Their peaked caps sat low. Where faces should have been, there was only deeper shadow, yet we felt them looking at us. No one moved. No one spoke. The central figure, the tallest, took one step forward. He raised his right hand slowly, palm outward. It was not a threat. It was a greeting, or perhaps a question. I stepped forward to match him, holding the paybook open to the final page. Ivan Petrovich Kuznetsov, I said quietly. Unteroffizier, 47th Infantry, You refuse to shoot civilians. For that, you were shot here with your comrades. We see you. We name you. We do not forget." The figure lowered his hand. For the first time since we had arrived, the pressure at the base of my skull eased, as though a weight had been lifted. Then, from the line of figures, a voice, not loud, not angry, but perfectly clear, spoke in accented German. "Das Statichno." Enough. The word hung between us. The figures turned as one. They walked back the way they had come, not fading, not dissolving, but walking, until they passed through the fence line and were gone. The cold lifted. Our breath no longer fogged. The distant artillery seemed louder, closer to normal. We stood there another 5 minutes waiting. Nothing returned. At 00:20 we walked back inside. No one spoke until we reached the corridor. Herr Lange looked at me. "Did we end it?" "I don't know," I answered, but it felt like they heard us. The rest of the night passed without incident. No whispers, no eyes, no footsteps. At 05:30, battalion radio crackled with new orders. Withdraw immediately to assembly area south of Belgorod. Relief column en route. We left Pokrovka at first light. We took nothing from the barracks except the photograph and the paybook. The buildings stood silent behind us as our half-tracks pulled away. I looked back once. The parade ground was empty. But I had the distinct impression that 12 pairs of eyes still watched, not in anger, not in malice, simply watching, remembering that someone had finally remembered them. Chapter 7. The Lingering Shadows. We left Pokrovka at 06:15 on 12th July 1943. The relief column, elements of the 7th Panzer Division, rolled in just after first light. A convoy of half-tracks, 2 self-propelled guns, and a motorcycle dispatch rider carrying the written order to withdraw immediately to the assembly area south of Belgorod. No explanations were given, none were needed. The main thrust had stalled. The Soviets were counter-attacking in strength. Our blocking position had served its purpose. We were no longer required. The men loaded quickly and quietly. Ammunition crates, jerry cans, personal kit, all went into the vehicles with practiced efficiency. No one lingered. No one looked back more than once. Yet I noticed how every man kept his head slightly turned toward the barracks compound as we pulled out, as though checking that nothing followed. The 12 figures had not reappeared after midnight. The parade ground lay empty under the pale dawn, the red XX from the old map now just faint scratches in the dirt. The photograph and Kuznetsov's paybook were tucked inside my map case. I had no intention of leaving them behind. They felt like evidence, proof that what we had experienced was not collective madness. The drive south took 4 hours. The roads were choked with retreating traffic, burned-out trucks, walking wounded, stragglers from shattered infantry units. We passed columns of Soviet prisoners under guard, their faces blank with exhaustion. No one spoke much. The radio crackled with fragmented reports of the Prokhorovka clash. Hundreds of tanks destroyed, thousands dead. But the voices sounded distant, almost irrelevant. Our war, for those few days, had been fought inside 4 brick buildings and a dusty yard. We reached the assembly area near the village of Rzavets shortly after noon. The division was regrouping, licking its wounds. I reported to battalion headquarters, a commandeered farmhouse, and handed over the sitrep. I made no mention of the paranormal events. There was a box on the form for special incidents. I left it blank. Some things do not translate into military prose. That night we bivouacked in an orchard on the edge of a wheat field. The men dug slit trenches, posted sentries, ate cold rations under tarpaulins. For the first time in 5 days, no one complained about sleeping on the ground. No one mentioned whispers or eyes or cold hands on their wrists. Yet the silence was different, deeper, more watchful. Around 02, whoa! I woke suddenly, heart hammering. I sat up in my foxhole and looked toward the sentries. They stood motionless, rifles at port, staring into the dark. Nothing moved. No sound except crickets and the low mutter of a generator half a kilometre away. But I felt it. The same pressure at the base of my skull. The same sensation of being observed. Not hostile, not angry, just present. I rose, walked to the edge of the orchard, and looked north toward the direction we had come from. The night was black. No moon, no stars visible through the overcast. Yet I had the distinct impression that someone had followed us. Not in pursuit, not to harm, simply to accompany, to make sure we did not forget. I spoke aloud, very softly, so only I could hear. If you are still here, thank you for letting us go. There was no answer, no whisper, no red glow, just the night wind moving through the leaves. I returned to my trench and lay down. Sleep came eventually, deep, dreamless. The next morning, the feeling was gone. We spent 3 more days in the assembly area before orders came to pull back farther west. The offensive was over. Citadel had failed. The Red Army was already counter-punching through the gaps we had tried to close. In the weeks that followed, as the division retreated across the Ukraine, the men of 2nd Company rarely spoke of Pokrovka among themselves. When they did, it was in fragments. Short references over shared cigarettes, never in front of officers or replacements. "Remember those barracks?" someone would murmur. A nod, a quick glance, then silence. I kept the photograph and the paybook with me until the end of the war. In 1945, when I was captured near Prague, I buried them in a tin under an oak tree before the Americans took us into custody. I never went back for them. Some things are better left where they belong. Years later, long after I returned to civilian life, long after the maps of the Eastern Front had been redrawn, I would sometimes wake in the night with the same pressure at the back of my neck. Not fear, not dread. Just the quiet certainty that I was not entirely alone. I never told my wife, never told my children. But on quiet evenings, when the house was still, I would sometimes stand at the window and look out at nothing in particular. And I would remember 12 names, 12 faces hidden beneath peaked caps, 12 men who refused an order and paid for it with their lives. They had asked only to be seen. We saw them. And in some way, I cannot explain, I believe they still see us, those of us who passed through their barracks and listened. Not to haunt, not to punish, simply to remind that even in the middle of the greatest tank battle in history, some things are older than steel, older than nations, older than victory or defeat. Some things endure. And sometimes, if you stand still long enough in the right place, they will let you know you are not forgotten. I never returned to Pokrovka, but part of me never really left.